Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It has been a long time since I have done a hair tutorial, but I'm so excited to be here. Here's my beautiful client's before. We normally only do her hair around once a year, and she gave me just about a lot of free reign today, which I was super excited for. So there are a couple things that I wanted to take into consideration for her. So I only really do her hair once a year, like I said. I have been doing her hair though for the past like 5 years, and she just has like the prettiest features, and I wanted to use those to help us just get the best result. I've been really getting into color analysis and color theory with helping to formulate like clients' best looks based off of their natural features, and I feel like it just helps to like further curate colors truly to them. And she actually had even said when she sat in the chair, she was like, I love how you do your color theory. So I kind of just want you to just tell me what you think I need. Like, I just want a big change, was what she just kept saying. So there were a couple things that I took into consideration with that, because we've done a couple different types of blonde on her, and we do normally keep it fairly lived in so that she can get like upwards to a year out of it. And she did say that she is totally okay with like maybe letting it grow out for like a year, but she's probably going to come back in a few months because she's probably going to do a big chop. She just has a few weddings coming up that she wants to keep her length for now, but that's besides the point. But anyway, so a couple things I like to consider in when it comes to color theory, color analysis, and formulation, and just road mapping for clients and their features. So let's talk about her natural base first. So she's obviously naturally, like I'd say like a light brunette or like a level 6. It's really hollow and mousy though. So just about any time I do a root melt on her, I actually like to add some richness into her root because I do feel like it is a little too cool. She does have very cool features, as we can see too, which I'll show. There's some clips that kind of show her complexion a little bit more, but she's got very rosy, pinky undertones. However, her brows are a little bit lighter and they have a little bit more warmth to them as well. Like they definitely kind of have a little bit more of like an auburny undertone, I'd say. And so I just feel like they kind of, her natural base with her brows just kind of clash. So I do want to keep her natural level. I don't want to make her look like she is like fighting to be a blonde. We did decide that we're going to be adding a lot of blonde on her, but it's going to be more so towards her mids and ends. And I'm keeping her root fairly dimensional. We are placing her highlights, we're starting them up a little higher up than we normally do because, again, she did really want a change. But there's a way that you can do it with still enhancing the natural roots and natural features of the client. So what I'm doing is I'm starting off in a Mohawk section, as you guys can see, and I'm doing, in this Mohawk area, I am doing a fairly heavy head of really thin TEASYLIGHTs. And I am basically having to put her whole ends in the foil just because it's been literally a year since we done anything. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, I think we did like a medium blonde on her last time. So we were definitely making this a little bit more of like a brighter blonde for sure, which I'll get into like the formulation for her root and her toner later on. I just kind of want to talk about like placement right now. So what I've been loving to do is the back-to-back really thin either slices or real thin weaves or a mix of both, which that was basically what I was doing on her, was a mix of both slices and weaves up in this Mohawk section. And I am using OLIGO BLACKLIGHT lightener. It is literally my tried and true. I use it for literally just about anything. I've used it for, gosh, I think like 7 years now. And so what I'm doing is taking really thin sections and leaving very minimal leave out in between. And I'm teasing, I'd say it was around like 2 inches of her root that I was teasing as well, just so that we're still leaving some natural depth up there too. Now we're getting into the money piece. So I have fully changed how I've been doing my money pieces lately, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm so obsessed with them. So I just like to take them like horizontal now. I was at first going along the hairline, but honestly, I feel like it was just giving me more problems than not. But what I do to still make sure that it's staying curated to the client is that very first section, I take a very fine slice and then I weave that slice so that it's like, then I feel like the leave outs of that of that slice, or like the leave outs of the weave, really help to kind of go along their natural hairline. And then if I'm wanting it to be a pretty bold money piece, then after that is when you'll see me start to go in with slices that are back to back. So I go in with a few slices and I take them all the way up. And then I will start to eventually, as I work my way back, start to fluctuate between slices and weaves for the money piece. And I've been really trying to have very transitional money pieces. And I want it to be something where you can't even really tell where the money piece stops and where the rest and like the interior of her hair begins. But you just see lightness where you see lightness at, you see the boldness, but you also see the soft dimension. And the thing that I have really learned with that is just to have a very, very, very slow transition from the money piece to the interior or the back part of her hair. So what I start to do is go back and forth between weaves and slices, which is what you start to see here. And that already kind of like starts as like it's like a hybrid between the money piece, but also to helping to transition. And then I start by taking just the very slightest of leave outs in between the slices and the weaves until I get to the point where I can kind of start going back into like my standard sectioning, which honestly, at this point, anything in this front area is either like anything when I'm standing in front of the client, anything of that is for the most part either the money piece or the transitional part of the money piece. And I didn't used to take as much attention to the money piece beforehand, I don't feel like. And then something else that I do too that you guys are starting to see is I do start to just ever so slightly start to tease out some of those sections since I am doing teasy lights. If I wasn't doing teasy lights, I wouldn't be adding that extra step of teasing it in. But I do start off by just doing very slight pushes of tease, and then I start to make my tease more longer and longer. So I'd say I start off by teasing like a quarter of an inch. And like I said, in the back, I was teasing around 2 inches. And just every section, I start to tease out more and more. So going from a quarter of an inch to, let's say, half an inch, 3/4, 1 inch, so on and so forth, until I get to that point where I am basically at where I was at in the back, if that makes sense. And same thing then, as I'm starting to increase my tease is then when I'm starting to also increase the amount of leave out in between and increase the just the amount of space that I'm leaving in between as well. That is going to be helping to transition this to the back of the hair. And that's what's going to be making this as seamless as possible, is just what I've learned is just very, very slow transitions. Now we are making her a pretty high impact blonde, so I am teasing out the dropouts. If you were leaving some dimension through the ends, you don't have to do that. But what we decided that we're going to do for her placement is leave her pretty rooty up top and have very slight dimension, and that just as we make our way down more and more, we're just going to be adding more and more lightness and just having it transition to the point where it's basically like all solid blonde at her ends with maybe just little bits of softness, but very much more close to like 100% blonde coverage on her ends. So you will be seeing me tipping her out then too. And I do that every few foils. And I try to do that too as I go, because I've learned that if I tip out all the dropouts at the end of highlighting, because it lives, those dropouts are going to be way further from the scalp, so that natural heat is not going to be helping that lift more. Plus too, I mean, on this client I know I don't, but sometimes on clients they have like a little bit of old color on the ends or something like that, so sometimes those need a little bit more time to lift. Now we are starting to move on to the sides of her hair. And so what I like to do with the sides is I'm very big on trying to foil along with like the growth pattern and the natural head shape of the client. So I like to use the sides to really enhance that. And so what I like to do is really go in with a lot of diagonal forward sections for that then too, and make sure that you are treating the sides of the hair and the side hairline. That is still a part of the money piece, even though you're not necessarily always highlighting at the same time as the money piece. It still needs to be treated as such. So I like to follow like a really similar foiling pattern as much as I can. So I did a slight weave right along here, and basically anything that's going to be that pure hairline area is going to be a slight weave followed by fine slices in the back. And then you will see that then those will kind of start to transition. I don't feel like the sides need to have as much transitional sections like the top part does. And I do actually like to use the sides to build dimension, especially in the interior part of the hair. But just make sure that you are following a really similar foiling pattern in the side part of the hairline. And then another spot that you cannot leave out is right above the ears. This is a really crucial part because this is where the client will see when they pull their hair forward. And if you are leaving that out, there can be a lot of disconnect from the like front to the back of the hair. So it's really important to treat the whole, I basically kind of count the whole side hairline money piece area as above the ear, and I kind of make it like a curved section that is like from above the ear and that hairline area that is where it connects to then like the top Mohawk spot is what I kind of all count as the money piece. And then everything on the interior spot is where you'll see me like build dimension at more. So in this little like interior like transitional areas where I'm going to be doing more weaves, and you see like the sections aren't as fine. Just because, again, like I said, this is kind of like in between the money piece and the interior of the hair as well. But you do just not want to neglect this, though, too. You want to still, like I said, treat it as a money piece and treat it, and it still needs the same amount of detail work that the top part got. So I'm going to be doing a lot of weaves right in through here. And I like to bricklay and kind of like piggy back and forth when I'm working on the sides of doing a few of the hairline pieces. And then I'll probably start to do some interior dimensional pieces as well. And I kind of just like to bricklay as I work my way up, where I'll do a few hairline pieces and I'll do a few interior pieces. It kind of just depends on what I'm doing and that client's amount of hair and all that kind of stuff. And where you guys see I'm doing those interior pieces, and you saw a lot more tease was being done there, and I'll be leaving out, like I said, those larger subsections in between too. Now, if we didn't, if it hadn't been a year's worth of grow out, probably would have been able to leave a little bit more dimension in between too. But because there was, like I keep saying, like a year's worth of grow out, and she basically came in brunette, and I was trying to have her leave as blonde, I did have to pack the foils in a little bit more. If there was more blonde to work with, I would have been able to add a little bit more natural dimension. But what I'm kind of doing to help counteract that is I'm going back and forth between slices and weaves. Normally I do mostly slicing when I am working on this interior part, and I just make my slices really thin. But just because, again, I just keep, like I keep saying, don't want to over foil and over blonde her. That's just what I felt like was kind of like a good compromise. And then here I am is where you guys see me doing is making sure that I'm tipping her out still, even though I do have a little bit more dimension being built in through here. We do still want all of her ends blonde, especially towards these ends, or especially towards these sides too. Again, like I said, this is an important part because this is where she sees when she pulls her hair forward. So it's just as important as the top and the top sides too. So I'm doing the same thing just from a different angle basically on the side. So I'm going to pop out and just have you guys just like watch me foil because everything's basically all the same. And you just get to see it from a little bit of a different point of view. Now we are into the back of the hair. And so in the back is where, again, you're going to see the most amount of dimension being built in through here. So I don't need to do nearly as much foiling work in the back. I normally like to start off with the top and the sides for a couple different reasons. One, I feel like the top and the sides actually take longer to lift typically because there's not as much natural heat. And this back area is typically where our heads are a little bit more warmer. So the natural heat from our scalp is going to help these foils lift a little bit faster. Plus two, just in complete honesty, since I'm doing my most detail work up front, I just have the most of my like mental energy for the front. And in the back then is where if I am kind of starting to like, die off a little bit in terms of energy, I'm typically almost done and building dimension more anyway too. And I don't have to have my creative brain on as strong. And I feel like the groundwork has already been laid out for me and I can kind of use the groundwork from the front and the sides to help me dictate how exactly I'm going about the back. Whereas I feel like when I start in the back, I have to keep my mental work just as strong. So there's a very few times that I honestly start in the back. It's only if I like have to do like a lot of extra foiling basically. And what I personally like to do is I start at the top and I work and I kind of like foil back. I don't want to say backwards, but I start at the top and I just like lift those sections up and I go until I'm at like I'd say like the occipital bone, the top part of the occipital bone. And then I feel like at that point it gets kind of hard to like keep lifting those sections up. So I just keep those lifted up and then I'll start at the nape and then I kind of just like meet where I stopped in that like middle area. I don't really like to start in the nape anyway either because again, that is like the warmest spot and with the finest of hair. So that spot lifts typically like the fastest. So I don't feel like it's necessary. I feel like that's a little easier if that's like one of the last foils to be done. So now let's talk about formulation. So like I was saying, I wanted to add a lot more richness to her base. And with that, I didn't want to make her root copper by any means, but she is naturally like a pretty ashy, mousy level 6. And so I wanted to add a lot more gold, richness, all those things. So what I did for her root was I used Redken Shades EQ, 6NB, and 6GB. That is my favorite root formula for roots like this. And what I did was I sectioned her out at the shampoo bowl. I made her extremely, extremely towel dried as much as I could. I still had it on damp hair. I don't really like to root on dry hair as much as I can. It's just personal preference, but I did make sure that the hair was fairly dry as much as I could. And first I just want to show you guys, like, look at that natural, like, it's just still so seamless. This is before I root melted her, by the way. This is just all like the raw lift. It was just so naturally soft and I loved it. But anyway, so I applied her root melt and I let it, I'd say I took it down like maybe an inch and a half down, or an inch and a half to 2 inches down. I didn't really want it to be much lower than where I didn't need to root melt to blend. I more so root melted because I just wanted to add the richness. So I really just kind of stopped it where a little bit lower than where the highlights were starting, because with that TEASYLIGHT pattern, you really don't have to root melt if you don't want to. The only thing I would have done differently if I wasn't root melting is I wouldn't have baby lit her money piece. I would have definitely like teased them if I knew I wasn't root melting. But since I did, I was like, I'd prefer to for this exact placement. But anyway, what I did was apply this, and I started it at the top part because I wanted that to sit as much as I could, because I do want it to get as much of like that full processing time to add as much of that like richness as much as possible. And I do feel like in order to do that, it needs to get like as close to the 20 minutes as much as you can. And then what I did was I went into her end formula, and because she is cooler, but I don't want to we don't want to like enhance her coolness. We don't want to necessarily shy away from it, but we don't want to wash her out. And we feel like because she's naturally a brunette and because her brows have a little bit of warmth in them, too cool of a blonde would wash her out. But too warm of a blonde would also go against her skin tone too. So with that, I kind of like to do more like neutrally champagne-y blondes for that. And she lifted to just about like a perfect level 9. Like I don't need to do a ton of like toning correcting or anything like that. So what I decided to do for her end toner was OLIGO CALURA gloss, and I did 9N, 9GI, and I did just a little bit of 9V just for like a little bit of toning, but literally just like a splash of it. The 9N is that nice, perfect neutral, and then the GI is the gold iridescent. And what I love about Oligo's GIs compared to Redken's is the Oligo GIs have 50% of gold, 25% of blue, and 25% of violet. And I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I don't believe that Redken's GIs have any blue. So I feel like it's a little bit more of a cooler gold, and it is truly like my favorite toner. Like I could not live without it, if I'm being completely honest with you. I love it so much. And because her hair lifted perfectly, I did let this sit for about like 10 minutes because I mainly am just toning to like deposit color. And this wasn't a toner that I had to like watch and rinse out like the second that it was done, if that makes sense. And you guys, look at this after. Like, this is definitely one of my favorite colors that I've done so far. And I just love when clients like trust me to like do my own thing because it truly just like gave her so much of a glow. It was literally perfect. So just as a reminder again, here is her before, and her after is coming up just in a second. And I hope you guys enjoy. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. Make sure you follow me on Instagram too. I post a lot of hair education and content there, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.